All right, so just a couple considerations to make about laying out an amplifier before I get going and do any more. As I mentioned in the last video, this is going to be the chassis of the amplifier, and I'm going to have the speaker sitting up on top. So it's kind of a non-traditional, almost kind of like a radio style build that I'm doing here. But I just wanted to mention a couple things having to do with the placement of your parts. So when it comes down to laying out a tube amplifier, the most important thing to orient is your power transformer. As I mentioned in the last video, what was so nice about this power transformer is that it's so small. Now that helps in the electromagnetic field that it's going to produce. The smaller the transformer is, and the lower the electromagnetic field will be. So that'll work in our favor as we are laying out this amplifier. But even though it's small, I still want to orient it in such a way that it doesn't interfere, doesn't even have a chance of interfering with, say, my preamp tube or my output tube, which we placed on this side. So if you ever look at the anatomy of a tube amp, you typically see that the power transformer is on one end and the output transformer, or the output tubes and the output transformer or the preamp tubes are on another end. Well, that's because you don't want this electromagnetic field that's going to be coming out of this power transformer to get into the tubes or your signal path at all, right? So it's best to have them separated. But it's also very important to orient your transformer in such a way that the electromagnetic fields are going forward in one direction and backward in the other, but not going side to side. So if we look at this transformer, this is the secondary and this is the primary. Now either end of this will shoot out this electromagnetic field. So what you want to do is have the side of it, which is the iron casting, right? The sidewalls will be the iron core. And this iron core isn't going to produce any, if at all, very little electromagnetic field, right? So it's mostly going to come from the front and the back of it. So you want the sides to be oriented in such a way that they're perpendicular to your tubes and your signal path. The same thing goes for the orientation of the speaker, right? So I don't want it shooting right there into the speaker, right? I want it away from the speaker. So these fields will be going out this direction, forward and backward. I'm going to have a capacitor here. This capacitor, none of that will bother this capacitor here. So that's in a good spot. As for my tubes, I have them placed all the way at the left side of the amplifier. The thing to consider here is where I'm going to have my tone controls. So point-to-point wiring is what I'm doing here. Point-to-point wiring obviously is something that is praised in the audiophile field and in guitar amps, right? They have a particular sound, and this kind of like how the vintage builds were always made. But when you're doing something like this and you're not doing a PCB, one thing that you want to pay close attention to is the distance between traveling wires, right? So this is another reason why I have, you know, my power lines on one side and my signal path on another side. But I also don't want to do something like take the volume control that's supposed to be over here, because again, we want to make the shortest distance possible, right? Because these are our AC lines, which would be our signal lines, will basically be an antenna if we make them too long. So we don't want to run our AC line, like for the volume control, for instance, and put it over here, right? So this comes into play when you're talking about layout and aesthetics. You know, we can't be maybe too rigid or ideological about where we want our controls to be. They have to be placed in more of a practical way for the kind of physics that have to do with the electromagnetic field that's going to be operating throughout this amplifier. So you don't want to just say, well, I want my volume controls all the way on the right, so I'll put them all the way on the right, because that'll cause you to go about, in this case, maybe over a foot, maybe 14 to 15 inches over to the right, much closer to the electromagnetic field of the power transformer, and also just elongating your preamp circuitry significantly, then going back into the output tube, right? Because if you remember from the schematic, our volume control and tone control are coming right between this preamp tube and this output tube. So it's going to be tapped from right in the middle of the schematic. So the best thing to do would be to come off of here and to come directly up front and have them about here, right? And this board will probably be cut off there. But that's the idea. So we'll have our power switch and our standby switch on this side, and the volume control and the tone control on this side. I'll likely have the output to, or the output transformer, hardwired to this speaker, because I don't intend on doing any having an external cabinet, never plugging it into an external cabinet. So I'll probably hardwire it to there. So there's not going to be much going on the back of the amplifier. There's no effects loop or anything of that nature. So yeah, just some things to consider when you're laying out a vacuum tube amplifier.